Hi, I'm Julie. Today I'd like to read a story entitled Couldn't Believe It by Stuart M. Perkins. This story speaks to me kind of personally because when I was a little girl, I was raised on a dairy farm in Pennsylvania, and we had our potatoes stored in a basement down under the house, and this basement was really dark and dank. And the later it got in the year, the worse those potatoes got. And between my two sisters and I, we pretty much had to fight on who was the one that had to go get those nasty, icky potatoes. And okay, I'm not going to say any more. I'm just going to read this story. Couldn't Believe It by Stuart M. Perkins. Tolerant friends listen whenever I tell stories about Nanny, my grandmother. She was a fountain of valuable life lessons, and something happens almost daily to remind me of a Nanny story. So I tell it. Friends are not only tolerant, but often ask an unprompted question. Was she funny? She could be hilarious, and she loved to laugh. She told stories too? Yeah. True stories. I believed everything she said. You believed everything she said? There was this one time. So I tell him about a spring years ago when she said something I didn't believe. I ain't going down there. I squinted into the darkness. The dank smell of ancientness floated up through the cracks of the wooden door. Nanny asked you to, Vicky said sternly. Prodded by my older sister's reminder, I looked down at the uneven cement steps in front of me. They were stained and covered in dead leaves, and a shiny black beetle scurried past my foot as I hesitantly took the first step. The basement house, as we called it, was Nanny's cellar. It was more like a half cellar with an old shed built on top of it. Nanny canned vegetables every summer, and along with her homemade jellies, they lined the rough-hewn wooden shelves by the dozens in the cellar musty depths, just through the old door and to the right. To the left were the potatoes. Nanny's potato field fed her children, and her grandchildren. We, as an extended family, worked each year to plant, tend, and later dig the many long rows. Bushels of potatoes brought in from the field were spread out on large wooden racks down in the basement house. Stored there, the potatoes were used as needed by our families over the course of the winter. By spring, the potatoes were eaten. Some were still good. Some were shriveled and less appealing. Some were rotten. And only one hidden nastiness exists on earth greater than that of a rotten potato. And that is a lot of rotten potatoes. Each spring, the old and rotten potatoes had to be cleaned from the bins. This involved gingerly picking up squishy, rotten blobs and scraping their runny, putrid remains from the shelves. Apparently, Nanny had done this by herself for decades and would have carried on the lonely tradition again, but for a sudden flash of volunteerism. Vicky volunteered me. Nanny casually watered a geranium on the well as she verified, "You want to clean out the potato bins?" I noticed she grinned. "It ain't that bad." I didn't believe that. Vicky chimed in, "See, Nanny wants you to do it." I didn't believe that either. The smell of a single rotten potato can slap you right in the face. The smell of dozens fairly beat you about the head and shoulders. It's ghastly. Simply passing by the basement house while Nanny cleaned the potato bins smelled as if something down there had died 1,000 deaths, and she was wrestling with the aftermath. I remembered that as I stood on the first step leading down into the cellar. "Get," said Vicky, poking me in the back. I turned to look at her one last time before taking another step towards the abyss. "I'll be right here the whole time," she smiled. I didn't believe that. I smelled the rot before I got to the bottom of the steps. The slight breeze created as I opened the old wooden door caused sheets of cobwebs hanging on the walls to float up quickly in the air and then drift slowly back into place. It was dark in there. I reached up over my head to pull the dusty string attached to that one light in the center of the cellar and noticed that lovely tile mosaic on the ceiling. In the weak light from the dust-covered bulb, the tiny tiles seemed to be moving. They were moving. Camel crickets, by the hundreds, coated the ceiling just inches above my head. Their legs and their feelers wiggled in slow motion. I let go of the dirty light bulb string and slowly lowered my arms so as not to disturb a single cricket. Camel crickets don't hop when disturbed, they pop. If it's pop, it's another. That one pops. That pop hits 3 more. Those pop, and suddenly it's cricket chaos. "Vicky!" I yelled up the steps. "Camel crickets!" "Don't bother them and they won't bother you," she yelled back. I didn't believe that. Through the fetid fog of potato stench, I ducked, and I moved slowly under the crickets, past the wall of cobwebs, stepped over several dead bugs, and stood before the potato bins. I was sweating. I stared at the dimly lit mound of potatoes and decomposing mush, and I realized I had no training in this. Where did I begin? "Vicky!" I yelled up the stairs. "How am I supposed to do this?" "Just start scooping them up," she yelled back. "With what?" I yelled out loud. Vicky heard me. "Nanny just uses her hands," she yelled down the steps. I didn't believe that. Leaning forward, I grabbed what appeared to be a semi-solid piece of potato. It seemed fairly sturdy as I picked it up. 2 inches to the air, it still seemed solid. 3 inches to the air, and that heinous sack of disgusting, noxious potato juice exploded into my hand and ran down my arm. I retched, shaking my hand into the air in a feeble attempt to get rid of myself the sticky and foul potato goo. I accidentally flung some of it onto the ceiling. In doing so, I disturbed several crickets. They disturbed several more. And they disturbed the rest. Covered in rotten slime, I stood in the center of a popcorn popper filled with crickets. I had it. "I'm coming out!" I yelled up the stairs, and in 2 leaps I surfaced. Gasping for fresh air, I waited for Vicky to run sympathetically to my aid. Nanny's gonna want you to finish that, Vicky said from the swing under the apple tree. I didn't want to believe that. Vicky and I loved helping Nanny. No matter what chores she asked us to help with or what we did our best never to tell Nanny no. I thought about that as Nanny walked up, bucket in hand, and looked at me. Finished already? She asked. No, I said. I explained the overwhelming stench and the beetles in my shoes and the crickets popping and my nausea. I told her I couldn't do it and I didn't know how she ever did it. It ain't that bad, Nanny said again. I still didn't believe it. Well, it's gotta be done. Y'all wait here, Nanny said, smiling. Bucket in hand, humming a hymn, she headed towards the basement house and disappeared into the dismal pit. I sat in a swing by Vicky. I just don't know how Nanny can do it, I wondered out loud. You stink and there's a cricket stuck to your leg, Vicky said. As I plucked the cricket glued to my leg by potato goo, Vicky and I heard Nanny's muffled voice coming from the basement house. Mercy! Goodness! Boy, oh boy! Whew! We ran to the steps and peered down into the darkness. You all right down there? We asked. It ain't that bad, she called up to us. We went back to the swings and waited. Soon Nanny appeared with a bucket of potato grossness. She had goo on her hands. It dripped from her arms. She was sweating, and a camel cricket dangled from her hair net by one leg. Still, she smiled. Vicky and I asked in awe, how can you do that? I've had my hands in many a worse mess than this, she said. With that, she walked slowly to the field to dump her bucket of rot. She smiled, hummed, and laughed at herself as she plucked out that wiggling cricket from her hairnet. I still don't believe she could ever have had her hands in any mess worse than those vile piles of putrid potatoes. But, true to form, Nanny tackled what needed to be done simply because it needed to be done. When I couldn't finish the job, she smiled, took over, and laughed through the same misery that caused me to give up. I couldn't believe that. Thank you, Stuart. I loved it. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.